Hi there, I'm the Brewmaster. Welcome to the Blind Eternities Tavern. Magic the Gathering's most popular format, by far, is Commander right now. I think it has two big strengths that a lot of the other formats don't have, and that is that one, it uses the vast majority of Magic's total library of available printed cards, almost 30,000 unique cards. And two, it has a social aspect where you can play with friends and really tailor the gameplay to exactly how you want it to feel. Now myself, I lean more on the competitive side, and I like to build decks that are mechanically interesting and trying to go for a win rather aggressively. Yesterday I played in a CEDH tournament, and it was pretty crazy. The first round that I played, the first player had a Soul Ring into a Signet, and I think the second player Dark Ritualed into a Necropotence, and then the third player had a Mystic Remora online. I ended up going fourth in that round, so I played a Mana Dork, and then it was a Rhystic Study right off the bat into a drawing a ton of cards and going for the win but getting countered out of it. And then ultimately it came back around to the first player who was able to get a Thassa's Oracle line off and get the win. I was playing Terra, and I just didn't really have a good answer for it. In the second round, there were some really powerful plays. I think the first player had a Lotus Petal into a Chrome Mox for a turn 1 Rhystic Study, had a Soul Ring. Third player was me, and I played a Mana Dork. Fourth player, I think it was just like a land pass type play. They bounced the Rhystic Study, their commander, which was just kind of a value engine piece. Second player was able to get some more mana online, and I think got a Smothering Tide, got a food chain back to my hand. Player after them, I think, played the One Ring. The first player, again, also played the One Ring. The commander in play allowed them to just draw a ton of cards. I had food chain in play. They shut me out of being able to continue, and eventually finished with I think it was a Thassa's Oracle combo. The third round was really cool. Soul Ring, free interaction. Mystic Remora into play on the first turn. Soul Ring, allowing a creature that tapped for mana. I got more value into play, more lockdowny piece, draw a few extra cards. The Simic player who now had a lot of mana online and actually went for the infinite, uninterruptible Fairy Mastermind, just continuously layering additional draws on top while shuffling their graveyard back into their library. And then the fourth round was ridiculous. I started with a Mystic Remora. The fourth player actually got a Soul Ring into a Signet. My second turn, I had a pretty full grip into Terra, get a hold of a food chain, tutor in the same turn. Squee, the next player, engine that allowed them to sacrifice creatures to search for more creatures. Third player got his commander into play, which is a value engine that allows him to draw cards if he can feed mana into it. Fourth player was able to get their commander into play, a couple of other artifacts, looping food chain through my commander, and I eventually popped off with infinite damage. All in all, it was a great tournament and a really fun experience. It was cool to see so many decks tuned to their absolute maximum. But looking back, for a format with a selection of cards numbering over 29,000, there were a lot of repeats. And over time, no matter how different the commanders are, the games can feel a little bit samey. So today I want to take a step back from Commander. I want to talk about a different format with a much smaller card pool that has a much broader variety of decks, even at the most competitive levels. And not only that, this format's been stable for decades. So pull up a chair and have a seat at the table. And whether you're a button mash hack and slash controller bash, or a meeple moving mastermind of maps, mats, and minis, if you ruffle at the awful riffle shuffle scuffle, or if you're a click clack pick attack number ball luck sack, we're all here for the same reason. I'm Jake. Let's talk games. So to begin this discussion, I actually want to talk a little bit more about Commander. When we talk about diversity of decks, I think it's generally recognized that within any deck there's going to be some variation based on pilot and the build. Some people are going to choose one card, some people are going to choose a different card, either by preference, by meta, or by something else. But in Commander, for some reason, we tend to exclude the commander itself. And I think it's important to look at the general archetype, win condition, and style of play within a deck, rather than just looking at the commander. So when we talk about the diversity of cards, the diversity of styles in Commander, we want to look at the overall card choice, and not just that one card at the front. Obviously, Commander is somewhat unique in that it is a 100-card format. And for a 100-card deck, where each card is unique, you're going to start scraping the bottom of the barrel for any of these strategies that aren't super common. This means that for most of these decks, you fill your gaps with generically powerful cards. And when we look at the total deck lists that people play in Commander, we see that overlap. We see that 90+% of decks are using Sol Ring. It is just that good. I find it very difficult to find an excuse not to use it in a deck. In reality, Sol Ring is significantly higher power level than most of the cards that are on the ban list in Commander. I don't necessarily think that it should be banned. I think it's cool to have that variance and sometimes make the game swingy, but I will say from the perspective of that CEDH tournament yesterday, every single person that won either had a turn 1 or 2 Rhystic Study or Mystic Remora, or a turn 1 Sol Ring. I think those cards stand head and shoulders above the rest in granting you functionally extra turns before the game has even gotten going. So now let's move on to the main format that I want to talk about today. That format is Premodern. Now, Premodern is a format that uses regular deck construction rules from Magic the Gathering. 4 of a kind maximum per card, 60-card deck, 15-card sideboard, but the unique part is that the card pool for Premodern only exists between about 1995 and 2001. That's it. No new cards added, no changes made to that overall card pool, aside from a ban list that gets very sparse updates. It means that you are effectively in a closed system. And typically when you have a closed system like that, the solved state of the format is just months away. As people begin grinding, certain archetypes rise to the top, and then you have this, do you play the main deck or the deck countering the main deck? We see this a lot in the different time period formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! But the format of Premodern is incredibly diverse, and there's a lot of different strategies that hold their own. Occasionally, if one starts running away with it, the rest of the format will step up to deal with it. You see these shifts over time between sideboard decisions and general main deck construction. That balance is pretty well maintained. And if I started to describe the games to you, I said in first round, in my Premodern tournament, my opponent, turn 2, dropped a 12-12 into play by countering their own abilities. Or my opponent pretty much locked the game down just attacking with his lands. Or I say my opponent had this reanimator strategy where they were constantly discarding things from their hand and bringing them back into play. Or I say my opponent was playing a deck that basically makes all of their creatures free, and by cycling through them, drew through their entire deck and drained me out in one turn at instant speed. You know the archetypes, you know the decks, you have a pretty good feel for how those decks function. And occasionally, you'll see weird rogue decks pop up, using strategies that cannot exist in other formats. You see these strategies with 4 of a kind that only work in a 60-card format, things you can't do in Commander. There's a deck that I've seen recently that really excites me because it uses the specific era of Magic that I first started playing in, and it's a Volrath's Shapeshifter deck. Volrath's Shapeshifter is a unique card that takes on the form of whichever creature is on the top of your graveyard. And the goal is to get something like a Chroma into play, or into your graveyard, to make Volrath's Shapeshifter very difficult to deal with. And then right before combat damage is dealt, discard a Phage to make your opponent lose the game. It's really cool how these different strategies interact to make this diverse format and allow you to really put the pieces together to make a puzzle all your own. So now, let's look at the numbers. And for that, I think we are going to compare Premodern to Commander in the card choice and general archetype selection. For this, we're going to look at the most used cards in those competitive Commander decks and compare those to the most used cards in our competitive Premodern decks. Something that we'll notice is that in those Commander decks, there's a ton of overlap. There's a lot of cards that are used in 90+% of the decks. A few things sneak up there that actually do action, but most of it is about ramping quickly, getting your deck online as fast as possible. What's interesting is if you look at the most used cards in Premodern, not only are the numbers significantly lower, but most of those cards aren't focused on making mana. The funny thing is a lot of the cards on that list in Commander exist in Premodern. You can play Lotus Petal, you can play Mox Diamond. These cards are mainstays in the format, but only in specific decks. Because it's always more efficient in Premodern to maintain that card advantage. And I think that aspect of card advantage has been somewhat lost in Commander, just because of the state of the format right now, but also because of the way that people build decks generally in a 100 singleton card format. So in that Premodern list, we'll notice that a lot of the percentages of those top cards that are used across many decks only broaches that 30 to 40% mark, whereas in Commander, they are well above 90. I think this is for two reasons. One, Commander incentivizes playing with a lot of different colors. You can run a 3, 4, or 5 color deck in Commander and meet all of your colors fairly quickly, because you're not so concerned about somebody burning down the table extremely quickly, as you are in Premodern with some of these count to 20 decks. If you don't have a response on the first or second turn, you might just be out of the game. Commander also has the benefit of power creep. Modern cards that have come out that are significantly more powerful than the individual card quality in Premodern. Just playing one card in Commander can draw you 5, 6, 10, 12 cards at a time. Usually, it's accepted that if your opponent is able to resolve some sort of Necropotence with additional mana in play, they probably have the win. If they resolve, if they're able to slam down an Ad Nauseam at any point, they're probably going to draw half their deck and might just win from there. I think there are a lot of lines in Commander that are extremely tight that only require a couple inputs to get the win. But back in 1999, those lines didn't exist. And so the gameplay tends to be a lot more interactive. Additionally, in Commander, because you're up against 3 different opponents, I think you can buy a little bit of time by disrupting at specific points. Whereas in Premodern, you're head-to-head. If you don't have it, your opponent does. And that's the end of the story. So when we build decks in Premodern, I think we have to prepare for those outcomes and build around that one-to-one gameplay, where you are trying to out-card advantage your opponent, or really lean into that tempo to get under it. As an addendum, something I found kind of funny when I was looking through these numbers is even when you compare the more casual side of things, looking at EDH Rec for Commander and MTG decks for Premodern, we see that same discrepancy, although not to the same degree. In Commander, the numbers fall a little bit lower, down into the 80s, and then pretty quickly into the 60s, 50s, and 40s for those most used cards. And similarly for Premodern, we see the diversity of those cards actually come up a little bit into the 40s, just as people try to replicate some of the more popular decks in the format. We see more of that repetition. Something that should be noted though for MTG decks is that it actually includes the sideboard in their analysis, so you see some of those selectable cards floating pretty high towards the percentages when they're not included in the main deck analysis. Obviously this falls somewhere in the middle, and you can do a lot to try to balance these out and normalize them, but I think just talking about the raw numbers illustrate the point well enough. So now let's answer the hard question. How can a format with only 5,000 cards and a vibrant and diverse meta filled with very different decks and styles of play exist within the same game as a format with nearly 30,000 cards that have an overlap of almost 90% to the point that in any given game you can name 8 or 9 of the cards that hit the table at the competitive levels? And the answer to this isn't just the card pool. I think that having 30,000 cards and certain cards being more powerful naturally makes them rise to the top. I think the difference comes down to the structure of Magic and how it has changed over time. See, 25 years ago, in Magic, the game was built around making choices. Those really high mana cost cards, those really splashy, powerful things, you could play them in your deck, but you might not see them until turn 7 or 8, because there was no easy way to get up to that mana value. And if you did get up to that mana value, you were sacrificing so much that you were way behind your opponent on card advantage. If you wanted to run a 3-color deck, you could, but you're definitely running the risk of not having all of your colors at all points in time. There's just not enough mana fixing. At any given point, you have 7 cards in your starting hand and drawing 1 per turn if you're using 6 or 7 cards to get to something. It needs to win you the game because you don't have that many cards left, and there's not that many other ways of drawing the cards that you need. In Premodern, your deck strategy centers around your ability to balance card advantage and tempo. And your whole goal is counting to 20, which is what the cards are designed to do. In Commander, I think the game's moved a little bit away from that. You're no longer counting to 20, you're counting to 120. And the cards that you play don't need to maintain that card advantage, because there's always that 1 or 2 cards that'll win you the game immediately. A lot of people complain about CEDH because of this propensity to end the game quickly and make the rest of their gameplay irrelevant. And I think it's a valid concern. I think that is baked into the game. And I think the push to maintain a casual level in which these strategies are prohibited is a band-aid on a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that you can run as many colors as you want and not sacrifice anything. You can run extremely high mana cost cards and easily get up to those levels early on in the game, or cheat past those mana costs and get the cards for free. I think Commander gives you access to so many different lines that you don't need to worry so much about the core mechanics of Magic. Every turn you draw 1 card, you play 1 land, you untap 1 time, and you attack once. That's it. There's 4 things that restrict the gameplay in Magic. And Commander is built entirely of cards that break those. I think 60-card formats encourage certain styles of play that simply aren't available in Commander. The difference between having to knock 1 player down from 20 to 0 and 3 players down from 40 to 0 completely changes the face of the game. In the last 25 years, there have been so many cards printed that produce multiple colors of mana, so many commanders that you always have access to that are either value engines or mana outlets, and so many other cards that are just generally more powerful than what we saw 25 years ago, that Commander has become a little bit mushy. And so if you're looking for an alternative, you're looking for a format that does weirder things, does different things and allows you to use cards that you've probably never even heard of before, I'd expand my horizons a little bit. See what else is out there. Whether that is Premodern or Pauper, or even some of the more formal sanctioned formats. I think there's a lot of other options that are far from solved formats. And it allows you to experience some of these interactions that just don't exist in Commander. It's been really nice talking to you.